Hello and welcome to the Ornstein Chapman Podcast on The Athletic. As usual, we'll bring you exclusive and original stories and interviews offering agenda-setting insight from inside the game from David and writers from across The Athletic. There is, of course, no football at the moment, still lots of articles and ad-free podcasts published every day via The Athletic. We're recording this on a Monday. We know the Premier League meeting was last Thursday. Do you think, I don't know, from conversations you've had today or over the weekend, there's a change in what people in the game are thinking from last week?
Well, we talked last week about the confusion that was reigning. I don't think there's a great deal more clarity. I think now the feeling among those I'm speaking to is more a case of concern, especially given what we've learned from Spain today with an indefinite suspension on the season, and the absolutely tragic scenes going on in Spain itself, Italy, and of course in the UK. Football is being put to the back of most people's minds, and rightly so, but this is an industry that people are working in, that people's livelihoods depend on, that supporters are looking for some kind of update on all of the time. So are people inside clubs. Some clubs have got players returning to training in small groups in very carefully protected and organised manners. Clubs are doing loads of initiatives with their communities. The Premier League has a huge problem on its hands, both logistically, financially, and none of this matters compared to the grand scheme of things with the health situation. But it all does need to be sorted out, and the unpredictability of the virus means that it's almost impossible to do that.
Matt Slater, the Athletics football news and investigations reporter, joins us as well at the moment. And certainly in a lot of the stuff that I've been doing and talking to people, Matt, the mood music has been less about, validating the competition and satisfying the relegation issues or promotion issues or who's going to win a title, but more about really people's livelihoods depending on not just football but on sport in general. And it's that health of the nation, obviously, and also the financial responsibility of the game. That's where I sense it has moved.
Yeah, Mark, I completely agree. I think people have been in shock. I mean, understandably so. As we've discussed before, this is unprecedented. That's the sort of cliche about this. It's true though, and I think sport, like all other sectors in life, is very much feeling its way here, trying to find that balance between carrying on. There's massive implications here that I know we'll get into in a minute about the financial side of things, and also the fact that people want to be entertained. People genuinely enjoy sport. It's an amazing distraction. But then on the same side, having a duty of care to everyone involved in the game, and also just getting the tone right. I think that has been the bit that I have really noticed has changed, I think, over the last week, really. That particularly in Europe, when Europe became the epicenter of this pandemic, and when the numbers and the horrible stories from Italy and Spain started to emerge, and I think we've really started to get our heads around, and I'm talking about when I say we here, us in the UK, just how bad this is, and how strange things are going to be for at least 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and potentially longer. That I think those things all crystallized, and I'll be honest, I have seen some genuine, I've witnessed and heard and talked to people about some genuine leadership and some quite refreshing, encouraging things that I've not been able to say for the last couple of years really, where different football organisations have put aside differences, have put aside agendas, and I think have tried as best they can to think about the bigger picture. So it's been a remarkable shift, and it's been really quick. But I was heartened by the succession of meetings and statements, and I think football is being responsible and rational at a really, really unusual time.
When people are at loggerheads in these sorts of circles, it's very easy to find out as a journalist. You speak to multiple people from all organisations, clubs, officials, executives, agents, the governing bodies, and you pick up on this stuff very quickly. And Matt's right. On the whole, they're singing from the same hymn sheet on this subject, which somebody at the PFA described to me as, the biggest crisis aside from 2 world wars in our history, and bickering and infighting and backstabbing would be highly inappropriate at a time like this. And it seems, thankfully, that there's a concerted effort to do the right thing for everybody. Let's see how that develops, because there are competing interests. There are, of course, as we know from our work, there's egos at play. And as time goes on, things will start to become more pressing. The finances, the need for clarity, the resumption of play, the transfer window, contracts, money will, of course, play a part with people threatened with going out of business, whether it be clubs, agents, players not being paid. And that will be the true test, because it feels to me that, as Matt says, everybody's still in a bit of shock and there's a bit of numbness to it all now. It's incredibly early. As we're speaking, today's the first day of kids being off school in England and people getting their heads around that. But as this settles into normal life, I wonder how it will develop. And, I've done an interview with Bobby Barnes from the PFA, the Deputy Vice Chairman, and it's the first time he's spoken on the issue. He's involved in all sorts of bodies, FIFA, UEFA, the World Players Union, FIFPro, and the Players Union here, the PFA. And he's sort of talking about how players are now coming round to the idea of playing behind closed doors from those he's spoken to, because there is literally no alternative, because it's so important to get this season finished at some point. But then as soon as somebody raises points like that, somebody else replies with a counter argument that you shouldn't even be thinking about football when people are dying in hospitals and at home. So a very, very worrying picture, but at least there is some kind of cordiality among the various interested parties.
I wonder whether part of this, still talking about playing behind closed doors, is financial. And I'm not necessarily talking about broadcast deals and TV deals. I'm talking about actually players certainly lower down the leagues. It's all right people suggesting Premier League footballers take a 50% pay cut or whatever it may be. And I know several rugby union clubs and players are taking pay cuts. But if you ask a lower League 2 player to take a pay cut, that would have an enormous effect on his day-to-day life. And there will be people listening to us at the moment who are freelance or self-employed who have lost all income at the moment. And therefore, I do wonder whether talking about, getting some games on behind closed doors is actually a financial necessity when it comes to PFA being in those meetings because of the players lower down the leagues.
I want to sort of be clear on this. A lot of people have been suggesting that us talking about the financial side of it just shows football's greed. And I don't buy that at all. These are inevitable facts to do with this whole industry, to do with this whole world. And yes, they are thinking and talking about the financials of it all. But as you say, these are livelihoods, these are careers, this is existences, and clubs are part of the community. Players, staff, executives, are all of us, we're all concerned about the money, and the conversations have to be had. The idea of going behind closed doors, I don't think is because of greed. I think it's because there are some enormous contracts that need to be fulfilled, or leagues, clubs face potential oblivion. And again, you might say, well, that's far less important than death. It's true, but it has to be discussed. The players at the higher level, we can't write them off completely in terms of, yes, they do have more money than players at the lower level, but it's all relative. They have their relative outgoings, and okay, it's not as pressing, but we can't just dismiss that altogether. And there's one or two very high-ranking officials at Premier League clubs who are heavily in favour of players taking either a salary cut or, as Bobby Barnes describes it in the interview I did with him, wage deferrals. And that's something that has happened at lower league clubs when they've been in crisis, and the PFA have stepped in to help players' wages for a period. But at the lower level, it's more terrifying and alarming. Matt, do you agree that it's not so much greed but more necessity to sort these things out?
Well, I've written stories about greed in the past, and it can be very easy when you're writing, particularly, let's say, a club in crisis type story in more normal times, and you'll hear stories about owners who are trying to strip assets, or it's all about the stadium, it's a big property play. You'll get these sort of greed angle when you sometimes talk about transfers. Fine, right? That's not what this is. It really isn't. This is a systemic existential shock to the global economy. Now, that is going to have impacts everywhere. Fans, players, communities. Some people might find this distasteful that we're talking about this stuff when people are dying, and I completely get that. And I I feel a bit uncomfortable about it myself. But there is a sort of kind of maxim that life goes on, and we've got to be very careful that when we emerge from this in a year's time, that we have mitigated and we have minimised the damage, because we could be talking about many, many more impacts. People with mental health issues because they're struggling with money. Good companies, good solid companies that have gone to the wall because of cash flow issues. So that's the bigger picture. Now, football sits within that. Football is a part of everyday life. It's sometimes, I can't believe, I don't like when people talk about football and business. They are businesses. They're little mini businesses. Yes, I know they mean more to you than most businesses in your area, and that, I think, only increases their importance. So I think it is a valid and useful and worthwhile thing to talk about this, the financial impacts of this terrible, terrible pandemic on the global game, and I just don't really understand this sort of concept of greed. I think, from what I hear, the leagues, the players, the unions are starting to get around the table and start to think about, okay, what can we do? Player salaries is an absolute obvious one. It's the biggest expense at almost every professional club. Can they defer wages? Can they take pay cuts? We know that Hearts have asked their players in the Scottish Premiership to take a 50% pay cut, and I think over the weekend Stephen Naismith, their captain, who's famous for his charitable work, has already said, yeah, I'll be absolutely fine with that. Football's been good to me.
One of the Premier League club executives, I said to him, would you look to enforce this then if you're keen for players to take a pay cut? And he said, oh no, because if the resumption of play comes and they've had their pay dock, they're not going to play well for us. They're going to be down in the dumps, and it's a personal choice, and this shouldn't be enforced. It shouldn't be held against players. But as Matt rightly points out, it's the key area that could save money. And from what I'm hearing within the game, it's one of the very top issues that's going to be discussed within the circles of PFA, Premier League, EFL, on the European and world scene as well, because those footballers will not have clubs to go to in some cases and earn money from if we don't look at this seriously in certain cases and try and find some solutions.
It's interesting on the, what people should be talking about and what they shouldn't be talking about. And I'm assuming people are listening to us because they have subscribed to the podcast before and know the kind of stuff that we discuss. What I have found actually is that there has been, certainly from working on the radio side of things, where it has been nearly constant news output, and I've managed to combine both some of the news output with some football discussion as well. But the way that has moved over the last week has certainly, after last Thursday in the Premier League meeting, has moved definitely more to how can football help? what is football doing within the community? How are the players helping, such as Wilfried Zaha offering up his properties that are free to NHS staff to be able to be staying near to a hospital that they are working at, or if they have to isolate from their families because of the job that they are doing, then Zaha and his commercial property partner, residential property partner, are opening up those houses for free. And therefore, I think as well, Matt, I know it is difficult when talking about sport in this situation, but the hospitality industry are having to voice their concerns and talk about also what they are doing to help the community. And I view the sport industry in the main to be very similar to that. People fearful for their jobs, people fearful for their community hubs, a restaurant or a football club or whatever it may be, and also what they are trying to do to help in these very strange times.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the number of conversations I've had with people who are talking about their sphere of life, their sector of the economy, and saying this will change everything. We have no idea where this is going. Football is faced with the same uncertainty. You know, when I talk to people, I think people are grappling with this and coming at it from different angles. I've been impressed with the sort of exchange of views so far. It's all been done in a very collegiate way. I mean, you mentioned people like Wilfried Zaha, and I talked about Naismith. We've got dozens of these stories. I was talking to Mark Palios, Tranmere Rovers, co-owner, and he was talking about what they're doing, and he's basically going to mobilise his staff. He's going to use his kitchens. They're going to get into Meals on Wheels. I think I have heard your conversation with Stevenage's owner. You know, these are not big clubs. These are not big wealthy clubs, but he was talking exactly the same way, that he was going to use his staff very much as a community asset. They were going to do deliveries for people. They were going to deliver food. They were going to be there to chat. I think what clubs have is they have, most of them, let's say, have a facility, have a good stadium, they have kitchens, they're quite good at logistics, they're quite good at putting things on. And they have a real connection, a real tie. I remember sort of a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, kind of at the beginning of this, talking to one of the clubs. I really can't remember who it was now. Oh, no, it was Chester. It's the 6th tier, who have, I think, 3 members of staff, and the rest are all volunteers. They're a fan-owned club. And they were saying, well, one of the real things that we're really upset about this is we can't do our community schools. We can't do our soccer schools. We can't do our disability soccer school. But they were already thinking, well, okay, so we can't physically do it, but what can we do? Because we know we're important to the town, and our fans are absolutely vital to us. There's a really strong bond there. What can we do? And they are coming up with ideas all the time. And I think this is being replicated at hundreds of clubs around the country. And I think that's a great response. And I think football can very much play a part in getting us through this and getting us back to something close to normality.
Do either of you know, and I'll start with you, David, on how discussions are progressing now? We know, obviously, UEFA and FIFA had a meeting last Tuesday. We know that EFL had their meeting on Wednesday, and they announced this £50 million short-term relief package, which is really paying some of the money up front to these clubs. We know that the Premier League had the meeting on Thursday. I would be surprised if there weren't, but are there daily meetings, discussions, conference calls, of course, rather than meetings, between the differing authorities, or have they all just taken a step back for a little while to see how things progress health-wise over the next week?
Yeah, there are plenty of meetings going on. Individuals within clubs and within those bodies are exchanging lots of emails. The use of applications like Zoom and Microsoft Teams is becoming more and more prevalent within clubs. Some of them have been saying to me that it's made little impact on their ability to meet and discuss ideas. The virus is in control of this situation, and so it's not progressing a great deal. I think the hope of Premier League football returning on the 30th of April, start of June, is very wishful thinking. People I've spoken to say no chance, it could be a lot longer. And as I said earlier, Spain has suspended its football indefinitely. There is a complete commitment across the board in English football to get this season finished. Well, that stems really from UEFA's decision to move Euro 2020, with the intention being that domestic leagues would be finished at some point, whenever that is. Some of the commercial, financial, contractual implications, I can't even get my head round if it goes beyond July, August, etc. But there is that possibility. There is plenty of modelling going on ways to finish the seasons. So within the hope that the season finishes, and by that I mean null and void is off the table pretty much everywhere in English football now. I don't know about other leagues. Null and void is off the table here. Modelling on how you might be able to finish it, with the best case scenario being that you play all games, but perhaps some alternative scenarios that sees, I'm hypothesizing here, I don't know this for sure, playoffs and various other ways of getting it done. Others cancelling or suspending their leagues will not have a direct impact on the Premier League. They will make the decision that is right for them. Now, in their diaries is still the 3rd of April, a Friday, for the next shareholders meeting. It hasn't been cancelled. I don't know if it will go ahead as planned and just be the next update meeting, quite possibly. Just shows how quickly things have changed, because the top of the agenda for this meeting originally was VAR and how that's going to be improved next season. And we were talking about that on a near daily basis before, in a way that we're talking about this now, but of course not with the same seriousness. They were going to talk about things like the European leagues and ECA reforms and potential reforms to European competition, but that of course is all thrown out the window now. As things stand, there's no kind of blanket approach towards training from the Premier League towards its clubs. You'll see some cases like Arsenal, who have kept their players off in an announcement on Monday. Others who, in drip-drab form, are going back. Take West Brom, for example, in the Championship. They've got sort of groups of maximum 3 or 4 players going in each day for about 45 minutes to an hour. It's very carefully controlled, so they'll go in wearing kit. They'll do a bit of physical training and ball work, and then they'll get changed at the end, I think, and put their training kit in a sealed bag, take it home, wash it, wear it in again. There are some players at the top end of the game, very highest level, and staff members who have I know who have contracted the virus, or at least symptoms, and been suffering. But from what I know, all of them are recovering and in a good way. Many of them haven't been publicised. So behind the scenes, this is incredibly serious, and the idea that we'll just get back training and get back to playing matches behind closed doors, while that there may be a will to get it done and to play behind closed doors, etc., it is so much more complicated than that. And yeah, these phone calls, these meetings, they're taking place, but frankly, none of them know any better than us what's going to happen. You've got scouts, I know, who are working and getting on with their video work and analysis. They don't even know if there'll be a transfer window. They don't know what money they'll have to play with.
Just a final one on this, Matt. And again, as I always say, if you don't know, just tell me you don't know. Are UEFA and FIFA, now they had that meeting last week, are they now standing back and allowing each individual organisation to follow their own lead depending on the situation within their own country?
One of the good things that's come of this is that UEFA and FIFA are talking to each other again, and because they've been at loggerheads, they've been arguing about various things to do with the calendar and various competitions that they want to launch, and really just a sort of old-fashioned scrap for power and money. Thankfully something bigger comes along, and minds are focused, and we all put everything in perspective, and they're cracking on and showing some leadership. I think there's a real concern. Well, if you let everybody do their own thing, there is the potential, obviously, for chaos, because we are talking about, let's say, from the UEFA point of view, European club competitions. I think 12 of the 16 Europa League and Champions League ties are at the last 16 level are unfinished. And of course, that is part of the fixture conversation, isn't it? There is a very clear desire to finish the domestic leagues, but equally to finish the European club competitions. Lots of ideas around that. Do we go single tie legs? Do we go with sort of Final Four style competitions for Europa League and Champions League at the final destinations? Gdansk for the Europa League, Istanbul for the Champions League. That could be quite exciting, couldn't it? I mean, that would be quite a nice way of finishing it. Is it feasible? Is it possible? Do you bring people in? What do you do for the one-leg ties? Is that a neutral venue? Lots of conversations, and I think someone's got to be kind of in charge of that. I mean, to go back to your earlier question about are there daily meetings, there are daily conversations, and there's lots of various working groups set up. And I think one of the key things that were announced last week by UEFA, kind of at the bottom, were they've set up these 2 working groups, which all the key people are now feeding into. One is about the fixture chaos. How do we get through this? When do we restart? How do we restart? How do we fit it all in? And the other one, I think, is, of course, the financial implications, which we were talking about earlier as well. So working groups are ongoing. They are, by getting out of the way, as you framed it, by getting the Euros out of the way, by getting the women's Euros out of the way, by getting the under-21s competition out of the way, they've cleared the summer. And they've said to the domestic leagues, you have priority, you finish, we'll finish our club competitions as well, our European club competitions. At the same time, CONMEBOL, who's UEFA's equivalent in South America, they moved their Copa America. They moved their South American tournament a year back. At the moment, CONMEBOL and UEFA are very, very pally, so that was no real surprise. The African Football Confederation, which are very tight to FIFA because FIFA's effectively been running them for a while, they moved their African Nations Cup, which is known as CHAN. It's the African tournament for players based in Africa. It alternates with the African Cup of Nations. So they've moved that as well. So the confederations have moved out of that summer space and they've given it to domestic leagues. But someone does actually have to have oversight there because, it was suggested at one point, I think a couple of weeks ago, this is all touching wood. This is all caveated with, we hope that countries that are in the thick of it now, I'm obviously thinking about Italy and Spain, will hopefully be coming out of it sooner. So do they restart sooner? Well, we've all got to get to the same endpoint, haven't we? That's, I think, the key thing here. We've all got to finish and then have a little mini break and start again. And I think that's just what UEFA and FIFA have to be mindful of. And they are, from what I hear, just making sure that everyone gets what they need to do, which is finish their domestic competitions in that coherent manner to hopefully satisfy as many contracts as they can. Not going to satisfy all of them, and that everyone agrees to sort of, lose a little bit, but we're all going to lose a bit equally and together. So hopefully we're not going to destroy businesses so that, we can all carry on as per normal. And I think, as I say, FIFA have ultimate oversight of the global calendar. And they, I think what they've said so far has been helpful. They've talked about maybe setting up a global assistance fund. They have the biggest cash reserves, but then again, also I suppose they also have the biggest overheads. They have that cash is supposed to be distributed around the world. So it's complicated, but I do believe that the key players here are behaving well at the moment and doing the best they can.
Well, thank you very much to Matt for that. We're going to do one more story on this podcast, and it centres around Ronaldinho, because you may have seen the story that he has been in prison in Paraguay. Jack Lang has written about this for The Athletic. Just explain what has happened here then, Jack.
Ronaldinho was heading to Paraguay with his brother, who is also his agent, at the start of the month to do some publicity. Firstly, for a book he has written, or a book that has his name on it. Secondly, to make an appearance at a casino, and also to do a public appearance for a kind of non-profit charity he works for in Paraguay. He got through the border check, but a policeman on the border noted a slight discrepancy with his documents. It was later checked out and he was taken into custody. It turns out he was using a fake, falsified passport, a Paraguayan passport. Obviously, he's not a Paraguayan citizen. One of the ironies here is that Brazilian nationals don't actually need to use a passport to move over that border due to a Mercosur agreement. Obviously, embarrassing in the first instance, and it seems to just be developing as we go, really. He's still in prison. He can be held before facing trial on this for up to 6 months. And there's no sign at the moment that this will be a short thing. It's looking like it could ramble on because his business associates are being investigated by the Paraguayan courts. His brother is in there with him, and it looks like it's going to get bigger before it goes away.
The reaction in the main on social media has been, oh, look, Ronaldinho's in prison having used a fake Paraguayan passport. But as you write, this is a tragedy, not a comedy.
Yeah, I think so. I think in two respects, really. Firstly, because obviously he's a player who is really beloved from those all around the world. Really, he's his name will always elicit a smile from anyone who watched him play football, myself included. And it's tragic just to see someone in that position. Someone who gave so much pleasure to so many people. I think it's naturally sad to see him. Especially someone who played with so much freedom, now having his freedom taken away. But on a deeper level, I think it's a tragedy because just because of the way he's acted, because of how I see it is a case of diminished responsibility. He's someone who always allowed his brother, who was himself a professional footballer, his brother has basically taken care of the business and the money side of his career for a large portion of his life, really. Ronaldinho's father passed away when he was 8. That left a kind of a big gap in the family, and his brother filled that. His brother was an idol to Ronaldinho. He came through the Gremio youth team before Ronaldinho. He was a great footballer in his own right, did play in Europe. And Ronaldinho, to me at least, has always seemed to have this kind of starry-eyed respect and love for his brother that has perhaps clouded his judgment when it comes to their business dealings. So since retiring, Ronaldinho's lent his name and his face to all of these commercial link-ups. And obviously, all former footballers have adverts and they endorse things, but they're usually a fairly decent standard of product, or at least something that is known to people, whereas Ronaldinho's have been for random mobile games, for apps, for investment platforms, for investment opportunities, a lot of which have subsequently come in for a bit of scrutiny. There was one that was essentially unveiled as a pyramid scheme in Brazil that had his name on it. He's been sued for that. There was another one, kind of an investment platform that has been suspended for anomalies in their accounts. So all of these things kind of built up over time to a picture of not necessarily illegal activity, but certainly the kinds of endorsements that didn't really add much to his legacy and made him look a little bit low rent, in my opinion. And now, of course, there's this. This isn't even the first time he's had passport issues. As I wrote in the piece, he was kind of got involved in a dispute with Rio Grande do Sul, which is his home state. Their government, he and his brother, without getting planning permission, added a 70-meter long pier to one of their properties, which is in an area of environmental protection, and was given a massive fine for that, which he never paid. That later, after years of them chasing this fine, resulted in his Brazilian passport being confiscated. So yeah, it all adds up to a fairly ignominious picture, I think. And if you've been watching all this, if you've been monitoring his post-football activities, I don't think this Paraguayan thing comes as a massive shock. But of course, it is a real shame.
Jack, I was just wondering why he didn't use his Brazilian passport if he didn't need the Paraguayan passport. Was it to do with that second indiscretion?
Well, to my knowledge, I think his Brazilian passport has been reinstated now because he was named as a tourism ambassador by the Bolsonaro government. I think that was last year or the year before. So to my knowledge, he is free to travel at the moment. I'm not really sure why he's used it. That is part of the bizarreness of this story, is that, well, firstly, he didn't need to use a passport at all. And as far as the Brazilian press have been able to establish, he was just kind of handed this. He and his brother were handed these passports by a fixer who was kind of looking over their trip to Paraguay, and it seems to me like they didn't really question it. They handed them over and were later pretty surprised to find it was an issue. I think that will play into the next parts of the story. So the person who arranged their trip to Paraguay, a lady called Dalia Lopez, who is a kind of a business associate of the two of them, and was behind the non-for-profit organization that they were going to visit. There's now a summons out for her arrest in Paraguay. She's suspected of money laundering, and that there's a suggestion that this trip had something to do with that. At the time, now we're talking, there's no implication that Ronaldinho and his brother have done anything apart from using those passports. That is what they are being held for principally. But it looks like this investigation is going to get quite big. 15 people have been arrested in association with the money laundering angle. And yeah, I mean, for now, it's the passports that are being held against Ronaldinho. But yeah, who knows where it could go next.
This is absolutely incredible, because when you think of star names who have suffered falls from grace, it often revolves around addictions or gambling, alcohol. You think to somebody like Paul Gascoigne and struggles like that. But Ronaldinho seems to have been in the public consciousness fairly recently. He goes to a lot of events and is seen at major tournaments and quite a high media profile. I think to many people listening to this will come as a complete shock. What on earth has happened?
Yeah, I think that's right. He's someone who has maintained a fairly visible presence, as you say. I think a lot of that has to do with the goodwill that people attribute to him from his playing days. I think that blinds people, in my view, to some of the stranger associations he's had over the last few years. And of course, a lot of these are really limited to South America. It's not like he's hawking these products in Europe. So I think there's a slight disjunct there between how he is viewed in Europe and how he's viewed in South America. In Europe, of course, he's Barcelona's ambassador. He does Champions League events. So these are all fairly high class, glitzy types of affairs. Whereas all of these product endorsements are for South American, Brazilian products, and perhaps that side of things hasn't really filtered through over here, which I suppose that's fair enough. There's no reason for people to be digging through Ronaldinho's commercial interests. But yeah, I think certainly for those in Brazil who have been watching this and maybe had heard of the passport stuff in the past, the Brazilian passport affair, maybe it's less surprising for Brazilians.
Just a final one on it. Do you think he's a vulnerable individual, or do you think at times he has been a privileged individual who has thought he could get away with whatever he wanted to?
Well, without being able to call on too many personal interactions with him, I interviewed him once during a trip to Mexico City, and he was really personable. He was really, I wrote in the piece that he kind of shuffled into the room looking a little bit dazed, but the minute the camera was on, he was a really engaging character. And I think he has that personal charm, and I think there is certainly an element of him being indulged over the years based on that charm, based on what he was able to do on the pitch. Like even, his kind of famed nocturnal activities were indulged, even at his peak in Barcelona, really. And that was certainly true as his fitness and his physique diminished over the years. I think people maintained this position. That's just what Ronaldinho's like. Let him do that side of things and he'll still produce on the pitch. So I think there has been some amount of indulgence of him. Whether or not he is a vulnerable individual, I don't think he's necessarily the most switched on person. I think he is guided by other people in his interactions with his brother. I think a lot of people in Brazil see his brother as kind of a puppet master figure almost. This dates back just to his time playing, Ronaldinho's time playing, when he was leaving Europe, when he was leaving Milan to come back to Brazil, it was all set up that he was going to come back to Grêmio, his childhood club. This was seen as like a glorious homecoming. Grêmio had even arranged, like, you know, a big speaker system to play music and to help announce his return home at the stadium. They were expecting a full stadium for Ronaldinho's return, and then his brother, kind of at the last minute, I think swayed by a slightly bigger offer from Flamengo, kind of pulled the rug on this deal. And that really, I think, rung a few alarm bells, because it essentially meant that Ronaldinho was not welcome in his home state. Like, he'd left Grêmio under a cloud the first time to go to Europe, to go to Paris Saint-Germain. And this really turned him into enemy of the state. And I think a lot of people looked at that decision and thought, well, would the extra money that Ronaldinho was going to earn at Flamengo really outweigh the love and the adulation he would have received for going back to his hometown club?
Well, thank you to Jack, and that's it for this week. Make sure you subscribe to The Athletic to read in full all the articles from Jack and David and Matt and our team of writers from across the grid. Loads of articles out there, even though there isn't any football being played. Well, there's all the information on the latest with COVID-19. If you want some escapism, then Danny Taylor has got a couple of great articles on there on Brian Clough and Sir Alex Ferguson. There are also long reads on the rise of Erling Haaland. The Athletic are rebooting the 98-99 season, so all of that continues. All of our podcasts are there as well. They're completely free. That's it for this week. Stay safe, and thanks very much for listening.
Thank you.